Welcome back to the Chatter's Box podcast. My name is Kyle McClellan, your host, and today we have two guests in the studio that are going to be talking about the legendary Mike Shannon. We all know that we lost Mike here in the past few weeks, and so as we were thinking through what we were going to put out for this month, we thought nobody better to have in here than these two guests that knew Mike Shannon really well, could tell the stories, and give a little glimpse to you as a listener, viewer, a little bit about Mike Shannon maybe you didn't know. So we have Mike Claiborne, who has known Mike forever, been a partner of his and in the booth and all over, just around the game for a long time, and then his longtime good friend, Fast Eddie, as well. So thank you guys for stepping in the Chatter's Box and being a part of this and getting to share all the stories that I know we have about Mike. And one thing we all share is we all love Mike too. I mean, you couldn't be around him and not love him. So couldn't think of two better guys to have in here than you guys. So thanks for being a part of it.
Glad to be here. Glad we have a good editor here, so we may have a story or two, but we'll get through it.
We will get through it. Let's just start off with, obviously the news came out a couple weeks ago. You guys were close to him, spent time with him leading up to that, and knew, he wasn't in great shape at the time and knew it might be coming. But, what was your first reaction, when you heard, and what were kind of the thoughts that you went through?
Well, anytime you get a phone call in the morning, late in the morning, it's never good. I was lucky enough to spend time with him for the last homestand. It was his last game he'd been to. He was at the ballpark, and we spent some time together. John Rooney visited with him, Ricky Horton, Brad Thompson, and Chip Carey. We all just kind of hung out with him for a few innings and just, chatted it up. And, Mike was still pretty sharp about certain things. I remember Chip Carey was saying to him, what my dad used to say, Webster Groves could beat CBC anytime because Chip's dad, Skip, went to Webster Groves. And Mike, in his typical manner, just basically looked at him and said two words. One of them ended with "you." Let's just put it that way. And we all laughed, but that was the last time. But when I got the call, I kind of just stood back and just sat there. And I think Eddie and I, we were the first people to talk to each other after we got the word, and we had our moment. But you know what? Since then, I've tried to celebrate it because while he may not be here with us physically, his legacy will carry on, and because of him, myself, and other people who have so many stories about him. Most people know him as the baseball broadcaster. I think Eddie can chime in. We were blessed to be his friend because we saw another side to him.
Yeah, absolutely. When again, I started off as a business perspective of him marketing for me, and when he first, I saw him about a week before, and he was okay. He was kidding around the physical therapist that was there. Said it was her third time there, and every time he had a shirt on that said Mike Shannon's restaurant, she said, I started looking him up, and she said, man, this must be one hell of a restaurant. I said, there's a lot more to him than a restaurant. And he's over there laughing, and we're having fun. And so when it happened, you're not shocked when an older guy goes. It wasn't shocked, surprised, not shocked, whatever. And I'm telling you, I had a few days where I was just I never, I guess, realized, or maybe I got lost in how the things that he did publicly and how big of a human being he was by the friendship we had, and then, I was extremely upset for a few days because of the magnitude he's had on my life. He is. I don't know how else to explain it. He's like one of the loves of my life. There's a list of things that I've really, really enjoyed. My family, my whatever. And I really took it hard. And I kept thinking, an 83-year-old guy that lives a life like that. And I guess I was just feeling sorry for myself because I wouldn't be able to have, but now since then, after a few days wore off, I feel so blessed and so fortunate because of what he taught me, what I learned, what I watched. And it's true. You can sit around and say nice things about the people but this is different. I promise you, it's different. I feel like I hit the ticket or did the right things to get in with him. And moving forward now, since he's been gone for the week or whatever, it's kind of I don't know, it makes me feel good that I did whatever I had to do, and I know what I remember what I learned, the feelings that I've had, and he was really, really more than just a hell of a broadcaster and a funny guy, and to my life it was huge. It really was.
Those first 72 hours, I'm not sure if it wasn't for him, I don't know if I'd have made it.
Yeah, we were talking every few hours.
We were talking every few. We were checking it. And then we went to dinner one night, and I think everybody in the room saw how much fun we were having talking about him that they wanted to pull up a chair and sit with us.
Right.
And to pick it back on what he said, Mike Shannon has as much impact on me as a person outside of my parents as anybody I've ever known. And I think because maybe I'm older, when you lose people, you kind of just try and inhale the good things. And that's what I've been trying to do. But I'm telling you, those 72 hours from that time I got the call until we sat down, was that Monday night?
Monday night.
It was a Monday night because we got the
went.
call on late Saturday night.
Right.
I'm in L.A. He's in St. Louis or Alton.
Right.
And we went to dinner that Monday night. And I think we started at 6, and I think we might have been the next to last people to leave.
It was needed too, though.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think so, grown men, and it wasn't necessarily a cry thing, but to realize the magnitude of what he did, not nothing, to where I wasn't, for some reason, he's the first person that's ever really got me like this. My dad passed. Dad taught me a lot, like he said. The people in your life that have taught you a lot, and I really wish, and I'm telling you, his circle was tight. You knew if he loved you, and he knew if he didn't love you. And we were two guys that were in it, and it's almost
didn't
like
want to be on the other side of it, because I've seen that.
It was short and sweet, or not so sweet.
Yeah.
But I did not, and it hit me, and then I knew to snap out of that. And after that dinner, I woke up and I thought, man, I am one of a very few that got to take the ride with a very unique person. And everybody wants to know stories, and there's some stories, boy. But the story is overall every step he took his whole life. You don't want to take a page out of that book. Mm-hmm. It was how he operated, how he treated people, how he talked to me, he had some one line. He knew everybody in the damn world. He still had a flip phone, but I got to check out that contact list. I said, I bet you, as far as flip phones go, it's got the coolest contact list.
It does. And you know what? He's one of the last people that had a flip phone.
Yeah.
I remember one day he went to the phone store and bought all the other flip phones that they had left, just in case someone south on it. And he was like that, where like golf shops, he would go in no matter what golf country club we play, he go in and buy every black shirt.
All black shirts.
That's the only ones he would buy.
I saw him buy 8
black
pairs
jacket.
of shoes one time.
All the same color. I
liked them.
Exactly.
You never know, they might discontinue something.
Exactly.
They might discontinue something. Black shoes? And he's like, hey, give me all them shoes.
Flip phone was the same way.
Flip phone, I think he bought like 9 of them.
Yeah, he had a whole stack of them. And he'd always have an extra on in his SUV. Or his Suburban. He first guy that had a
Suburban.
Yeah.
Always had black clothes.
Always had a
flip phone, black shoes.
What was the black? What was that?
Because he said it didn't get as dirty as quick. You couldn't see the dirt.
Hey, you can wear this 2-3 times.
Yeah.
You never know where I've been. And if I'm wearing white, you can tell where I've been.
Exactly.
He
was so anal about that sort of stuff. It was just amusing after a while to watch him.
Yeah.
Carry on like that, but he was consistent. But one other thing, he was selfless. He would go out of his way. Let's say the 3 of us are here, and I don't know you, and you know him. He would make sure I was part of whatever we're talking about, the conversation, and he'd always say he's a good guy for you to stay in touch with. Mm-hmm. I've only seen one person who abused that privilege, and all of a sudden. He's making dinner reservations and playing golf, just dropping his name, and it didn't work like that. If you wanted to do something like that, all you had to do is say, hey, Mike, I'm thinking about taking my wife to whatever. Well, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. But this guy was like, he'd hear from the maitre d', hey, your buddy was in here last night, and it came to a halt. Let's just put it that way. But he was selfless.
so unimpressed with the celebrity part of his life, the people part of his life. You know, I'm a kid. You know, he's 50 years old. I'm trying to buy commercials, trying to build a business, and you know, I'm doing the whole Mr. Shannon. I told that story. I was sitting in a KMOX studio, and he's across the thing through the glass. There's 3 or 4 guys in there. Hey, Mike, you ready? Just hit your button when you're ready. Mike, grab your headset. Mike, grab your... This other guy's telling him, Mike, get your script. And I said, all right, Mr. Shannon, whenever you're ready, that's fine, you know. I'm ready. All right, you ready, big boy? Yes, Mr. Shannon. All right, Mike, let's go. And in so many other words, he goes, hey, wait a minute. How come the only guy in here that's calling me Mr. Shannon is the guy that's paying me? and the kid, sorry. I said, no, I'm serious. What in the hell's going on? This is what's wrong with the world. The guy that's paying me is calling me Mr., and all you guys are calling me Mike. I swear, the guy goes, sorry, Mike. He goes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, and then I called him Mr. Shannon, and the Mr. thing always stayed, and people would ask, like my mother. No, if they're such good friends, it's kind of weird that he calls him Mr. No,
he only calls him 2 things, Mr. Shannon, and he called him the big guy.
Big guy. That's the big guy. That's when it's, you know what, people would ask about, man, are you really that good of friends? And you'd always try to, no, I don't want to, no, he's too cool for me to call my friend. I'd always say, I could be the porter sometimes because it's either grab my bag or go pull up the car. So there was a lot of that going on. But I'd take any slot I could get, you know.
Well, I know my first spring training in big league camp, 2008, and I come in, and the first game I pitch in was I started against the Marlins.
I remember that.
And so I pitched that game, and I went home, and at the time it wasn't as easy to access. I don't know how I did it, but went back and found it because I wanted to listen to him call a game. You know, you got to understand, I grew up in St. Louis listening to him my whole life.
Right.
And now here I am in the Cardinal uniform, and Mike Shannon's calling the game. And so from a local standpoint, you know, that was like, I've made it. You know, I'm close. I haven't quite made it. I'm close.
But you know, because he would forget people's names sometimes. He said, young pitcher we have from the county. And then I said, Mike, his name is Kyle McClellan. Oh, yeah, Kyle McClellan from the county. That's how he would just bring it together. And you're right. If you were a local guy, he would make sure that everybody knew that he's one of us. He's a St. Louis guy.
Yeah, I mean, in all my interactions with him, he treated me so well. And you know, that player, and I mean, he's a legend, right? And so you're just a rookie player, and you know how it is in the clubhouse where you got to kind of earn your spot. It was the same. Sure. I felt the same with him. Like, hey, I'm just a nobody here, and you know, I'll just and you kind of earn his respect as you go. And you know, he was fair and honest to me, and we had great conversations afterwards, doing some of the stuff at KMOX. He was always good to me, and you know, but hearing that was special. And then when I started at KMOX, when I got done, Steve Moore, the program director, he said, do you know that you and Mike Shannon are the only 2 in Cardinals history that born in St. Louis, raised in St. Louis, and won a World Series here? And I said, no. I thought of a couple other ones. They said, no, he wasn't born here. He was born there and moved here at like 2 years old or whatever. And so I always thought that was a cool connection of, you know, we can talk a little bit about, I think people have heard, and we talked about this before we got on, people have heard he was a great athlete growing up, but you never heard that from him.
No,
you always heard it from other people. But give an idea of, I mean, Mike, you've known him for so long. Like, give an idea of, I mean, he went to CBC High School here.
I think he's still the only guy that was all state in basketball, football, and baseball in the same year. Now, you think about that. All state, not all conference, not all metro, all state in 3 different sports in the same year. Went to Mizzou for 1 year. And I guess I should tell this story because it kind of goes. So he was this is when baseball was signing kids coming out of high school, and you had the choice to go to college. So Glenn Beckert played for Chicago Cubs. Was the same situation, kind of with the bonus baby. So Beckert told Shannon, well, I'm not going to sign. I'm going to go to college, because they wanted to try and team up to make sure they got the right kind of money. Well, Beckert at the last minute signed with the Cubs. And that pissed Shannon off to no end, because Shannon had already committed to Mizzou. which, by the way, Frank Broyles, who's a Hall of Fame coach, then went on to Arkansas, would tell you that had Mike stayed at Mizzou, he'd won the Heisman Trophy. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Shannon is, he carries a grudge with the best of them. So now they're playing Chicago, and Becker's playing second base. And Shannon told Gibson, he said, if there's a double play ball, I'm taking him out. Well, lo and behold, and Mike had this clairvoyancy about him. He could predict things. So anyway, it was a ground ball, shortstop throws a second, and Mike puts this guy not only in the left field but unconscious. They have to stretcher him off, right? So now he's getting death threats at the hotel because it's on TV. He's getting death threats at the hotel, and, he survived, obviously. So fast forward to Ron Santo. Ron Santo and Mike Shannon didn't speak for almost 40 years. And so when Mike's wife got sick, Judy, Santo sent him a card. Hey, I hope everything's well. So when he got sick, Mike reached out to him. So over the time, they'd see each other in the broadcast booth, and so we get to St. Louis, and Mike invites Ron Santo on the show. Now, Santo at the time had lost both his legs to diabetes, and so he's sitting there, and we're in a commercial break. Now, I guess I should probably preface the fact that at that point in the show, Mike says to Santo, hey, what are you drinking? He said, I'm just drinking your house wine. He said, oh, we got something better than that. So they had a vault in the old restaurant, and he went down and got the good stuff. So needless to say, they were truly in the bag. And so Santo says, I didn't used to like you for a while. He said, yeah, I know why. He said, do you know why? He said, well, no. He said, because you took out my roommate. And he said, well, yeah, I did. He said, you know why I took out your room? And so Shannon explained the story on why Becker misled him, and Santo never heard that story before. He said, you mean tell me all these years I've been missing out on fun hanging out with you? And so that night, they were like two kids, and the funniest part about it, Mike says to him, hey, Ron, does anybody hide those pegs in the morning when you get out of bed? Does anybody ever hide those pegs? And I'm just kind of looking at it like, oh, my goodness. And so Santo was dying laughing. And I'll never forget, Ron Culper, Major League umpire who lived in St. Louis at the time, was listening to the show. And he just texted me. He said, they're both in the bag, aren't they? I said, big bag. And they were the closest I've seen Mike have a relationship with a guy who didn't wear a Cardinal uniform before Ron died.
So his time here in St. Louis, he goes to Mizzou for just 1 year. And then what happens from there? He obviously
he signs with the Cardinals, and
but he played football at Mizzou.
And
baseball.
And then he signed.
Gave
with
up
the
on
Cardinals.
basketball.
Yeah, would have made the team, but I think Mike was kind of enamored with all the other distractions that come with college your freshman year. And his roommate was a guy who had a convertible. So needless to say, car on campus, it's you made that. It's a made deal. So he left after the first year, signed with the Cardinals, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
He always used to tell the story. His first year in minor league baseball was in Georgia, and he could not believe the racism that he saw.
And what year are we talking here?
This is 1958.
Okay.
And he couldn't believe the racism, 58 or 59. Couldn't believe the racism. And so he goes to one of the people in the front office. He said, I can't believe this is going on. What the hell? He said, I've never seen this before. And the guy leaned back in the chair and said, you think this is something? We just let Catholics in this league last year. And at that point on, welcome to the real world, Mike Shannon. But he played in the minors. The stories he would tell me about playing in the minor leagues is worth a book itself. Some of the nicknames, Jungle Jim Rivera is one that stands out. He roomed with a guy who, in his opinion, could throw as hard as anybody. So but he wore glasses. And so that night, Mike had a nightmare or whatever and rolled over and broke part of the furniture, and the guy's glasses got broke. And he came out and tried to play catch the next day. And when they saw him without his glasses, nobody wanted to get in the batter's box for batting practice. But there was so many of those stories that he would talk about. And then he finally gets called up, and it was funny because he wasn't playing a lot. And so he went over to, it was guy that Gibson didn't get along with. I can't think of his name. Anyway, he went over to the manager. He said, hey, I'm not playing. And he said, yeah, I know. So he played him like for about 15 days in a row. At that point, Mike had enough. He realized he was, he was bringing him along slowly just to let him know. But he was an incredible guy coming up. He was a sensation. And I said before we went on the air, I've seen every Cardinal since the mid-'60s. And Mike Shannon is one of the top 5 best throwing arms I've ever seen, period. And they didn't win. They wouldn't have won in '67 if it wasn't for him moving to the outfield. Moving from the outfield to third base so Roger Maris can play. So
his playing time, I'm thinking my generation. I'm 38. I don't know his history of him as a player. Like, I know him as the broadcaster side. So what kind of player was he? What was his? What did he bring to the field? And obviously we can talk about it a little bit. His playing career got cut short, right?
He brought effort, first of all. Do anything to help the team. 260-plus hitter. Thank God there was a place called Wrigley Field because he hit over 300 at Wrigley Field. Loved day baseball. Could not get enough of it. And he was a guy that would do whatever it took to help the team win. But I think 263. Led the team in RBIs one year when they weren't very good. And he was a 6th or 7th place hitter. But he was a guy that everybody liked being around for a lot of different reasons. But that year when they took him from the outfield that winter and put him to the infield, he and Red Shane used to go over to Forest Park, and Red, because Red was a switch hitter, Red would hit him 200-300 balls. And Mike would say when he came home, his chest was just blue with all the balls that were hitting him in the chest, because he wasn't an adept fielder, but if he could stop it and just grab it, he could throw you out. He made a lot of errors early in his career, but he kind of turned into be a solid third baseman. He was a guy that could move runners along. He really understood the game, and the reason being, when he came up, there was over 150-plus years of experience on the team. And as Mike would say, they always took him out. He never paid for a dinner his first 3 years in the big leagues because they all, you know how that drill works. Young guys don't pay. But they, for some reason, liked him and taught him everything they knew.
I was gonna say it works that way if you're accepted and brought in.
Right.
There's
other guys.
There's a lot of young guys that pay for every meal.
There's burning up that per diem. Yeah, exactly.
You gotta earn that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and so that I want to speak to next. I mean, and this is where you guys can both chime in. People gravitated towards him.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you
were
just
magnetic as you could be.
And as a young player, I mean, I want to talk about the relationships he had. I mean, him and Bob Gibson were tight. Tight as and
his two best friends were Roger Maris and Bob Gibson. Two unique individuals.
Yeah.
You got one guy from North Dakota and you got another guy from Omaha. One's white, one's black, and Mike didn't care. Those were his friends. And one of the things about Mike as a teammate, one of my favorite stories, Cardinals used to have a guy named Richie Allen, pound for pound, maybe the strongest player I've ever seen. And I can tell that story later. So anyway, Richie gets traded to St. Louis. Now, Richie had some issues off the field, and everybody knew it, but if you can get him to the ballpark, he could create damage unlike anything you've ever seen. You would have a problem with him because you threw that curveball. He's one guy I've never seen. He hit a curveball. He hit Nelson Brow's curveball about 460 feet before it hit the ground. All right? So anyway, Richie gets traded to St. Louis, and Pat Corrales, who's another great friend of Mike's. I mean, they were tight because they came up in the minors together. Pat Corrales was from Mexico, but he lived most of his life in the States. So he would call him Big Irish, and Mike would call him Merry Mex, and they had fun with it. So now Richie says, "Hey, Mike, you want to go running with me tonight?" And so they go to a place in an urban community in Philadelphia. I'll put it that way. So it's Mike, Pat Corrales, and Richie Allen. So when they hit the door, the whitest thing in there was Mike's teeth. All right, there was not a black person within sight. White person within their area code. And so the room gets quiet, the bar gets quiet, and Mike walks over to the bartender and says, "Hey, you guys serve Mexicans here?" And so now the place erupts. And so he turns around and says, all right, Pat, you can drink with us now, just like that. And from that point on, every time the Cardinals would go to Philadelphia, whether Richie Allen was on the team or not, somebody from that bar would call the hotel, see if Mike Shannon was here. And they go get him and they take him out. But that was who he was. Yeah. I mean, he was a great teammate. And there wasn't a bar on this planet or a good golf course that he didn't know about. And I don't care what town it was in. That's who he was.
Can you share the story of what you were talking about in the minor leagues, about being in the South?
So Mike was playing in the South, and Cardinals had a black player on the team. And there was a fan that was just rolling every racial epithet you could think of, to the point where Mike turned around, looked at him, and was like, dude, what's the problem here? And so one thing leads to another between those two, and the guy says, if you don't like it, you can meet me after the game downstairs under the stadium. And the stadium had just been constructed. So everybody's looking at Mike like, this ought to be good. So when the guy gets up out of his seat, he's like about 6'6", 6'7". I mean, this guy's massive, right? I mean, arms bulging. And I heard this story from another black player, all right? Because I asked Mike about it. He said, who you been talking to? Because word had kind of gotten around. So as the story goes, there's Mike still in uniform. And here comes this guy, and Mike realizes he's going to need a little bit more than a fist if he's going to try and win. He picks up a pipe and says, all right, let's go. And the guy looks at him like, you would really defend him? He said, he wears the same uniform I wear. That's my teammate. And the guy threw his hands up and walked away. And that's the kind of person Mike was. If you were part of his crew, you had nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and then you said word spread on that.
Word spread around every black player in the minor leagues, and then it got to the major leagues about him doing that. Mm-hmm. And if you ever notice, some of Mike's best friends were black in baseball. Willie Mays, McCovey, Dusty Baker. I mean, those were his guys, you know. I think Dusty took Mike's passing as hard as maybe you and I did.
Really?
Because they were close.
Yeah, he spoke of him a lot.
Yeah,
I know him and Dusty had a really tight relationship. He was just so, whether it was color or whatever, it wasn't even. He was just so loyal to.
Yeah.
If he liked you, man, he was. And no matter what your social, economic, he didn't give where you were at in life. What if I'm in a room, literally, I mean, the All-Star game was here that night. I'm a bar owner from Alton, Illinois, man. And I'm walking around. It says no press, no nothing on the door, and they won't let Russo in. He's like, "Hey, big boy, you want to look at Jeter? You want to look at that, that clown, that A-Rod or whatever?" And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Well, I gotta go down here and talk." We walk by this guy, and I'm in there with every celebrity in the world, and he could make you feel. I don't really care. And I guess that's why I was allowed to hang around him, because I don't get impressed. I didn't care. Yeah. I just was hanging around Mr. Shannon, and he didn't. He was truly. I mean, it was real. He saw you. He was a broke kid from South City, that did well, and he didn't think he was better than anybody. I don't know. It would almost be impossible to not think you were cooler than anybody, because it oozed out of him. He was so magnetic, and so. But to the black thing or the. He didn't have time for that. Mm-hmm. If you were cool, man, you were in. He would protect you almost. Like, if you were at a dinner table and somebody, he'd jump right in, pick on me. Mm-hmm. It was always that. It was always.
He was very aware of the surroundings, and if he wasn't sure about an issue, he'd ask you. If there was something that would deal with race that he wasn't sure, he said, "Hey, tell me about this, because I want to know what's going on. I want to know how you see it." Mm-hmm. And I remember the George Floyd situation where baseball shut down for a bit, and we had the issue of what do we do, or why are people not standing for the flag? And I gave him my version of how I saw it, and he kind of sat back in the chair. He said, "Okay, I see that." He said, "Now, I can't agree with it, but I understand it, and I think I'm better for it." And I would hear him explain it to other people, because he was a guy who wanted to be in tune. And again, he might not agree with everything, but he respected it. And that's the thing. Because his thing was, if these people, protesters, athletes are willing to sacrifice something, there must be something worthy to them.
Yeah.
And I need to know about that.
Well,
So-
I think that was a big part of the personality of the kindness and
Yeah.
the to where and his depth was more than that yabba dabba doo ball goes out to left. I mean, the fact that he was intelligent enough to take another person's opinion and not judge and not tell me that was part of everything that he did. It didn't matter who you were. If you were in, you were right or you were wrong. And he had the like you said earlier, the clairvoyant. He had this like he could almost judge a guy before it happened. He could almost. I remember if 3 or 4 times I've heard him do this with like a guy, a waiter or whatever. He didn't really like him. You could tell. He's kind of. And I'm waiting for that bomb to go off. And he always was good to people and fair to people. But if the guy was an whether it's a good whatever, And I remember, hey, let me ask you something. And it was a little test he'd give a guy. You tougher than your grandpa?
Yep, that was his favorite question.
And if the guy'd always, nah, all right, man. That's all I need to know about you, because nobody in this society's tougher than their grandpa. I'd love to.
Remember, he said
like
He said it was 2 people. One guy was lying, and the other guy was a fool.
Yeah, that's right. You're either lying or you're a fool. And that's what it was. Yeah, it was always because nobody's tougher. So you get an arrogant guy. Hey, when he'd asked you that, I knew he didn't really like you, because he asked me on the car a couple times. Hey, what would you say if it, like hypothetically? Hell no, my grandpa would whip my, and he's like, that's why me and you were running around, big boy. He loves stuff like that, like rather than really rock the boat too much, just let you fall in a trap of, yep, you just put your nail and you're done with me.
Exactly. He would cross the street after that. He would
I'm done with
a voracious reader. He would read all the time, and he'd come in the booth with a book, or he'd tell me about a book he read. He said, you got to get it. And then 2 days later, he'd have the book. He might have. Amazon did not know who their best customer was going to be, because Mike would want things right there on the spot. And so once he found Amazon was going to deliver like overnight, he would buy things, especially, here's another story, about delivery. So he and I are doing a game. It's a Thursday. It's a getaway day, playing Milwaukee. McCarver's doing the TV. Euchre's one booth down. And so everybody's seen the picture of Bob Euchre with the tuba in '64. So Mike's sitting there watching batting practice. He said, God damn, I ought to get me a tuba. Euchre's over there. I'm going to get him to sign. He was something about him getting autographs of people, because he wanted to have the greatest collection for one day when he was gone. It'd be worth a lot. So he says, I'd like to get my hands on a tuba right now. So I'm saying, he said, I can get a tuba. No, I mean, I hadn't thought about it. Then I realized there was a pawn shop down on South Broadway near the brewery. I said, there's a pawn shop down the street. So he looks it up and calls a pawn shop and says, hey, you guys have a tuba down there? And they said, as a matter of fact, we do. He said, well, bring it to the ballpark. So the people downstairs like, hey, is Mike around? And they said, yeah. He said, well, the security's like, well, we got a guy down here with a tuba, and we can't let him in. Mike said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's a tuba. So Mike had to go down there and convince security that the tuba was for him. So now he says the 7th inning, he says, hey, go get McCarver and Euchre. So I go over and get them both, and he walks in, and he presents Euchre with this tuba. And Euchre, and the look that McCarver had on his face, I thought he was going to wet himself. I mean, and I have a picture, I'll show it to you, that he is laughing. Now, who would think about a tuba that took place in 1964, and all of a sudden it came to Mike's mind to get it, but he was dead set on getting a tuba from somewhere. And that's the thing about him. How once he was set on something. I probably
would have been driving to the pawn shop.
Yeah, exactly. Once he was set on something, he wouldn't let it go. He would not let it go.
He would be convinced that it was what needs to happen right then. And it would happen. He could make it happen. It was something, man.
So what's his autograph collection like?
Gosh.
I mean.
You know what? Anybody who came into the booth, he'd have a couple of dozen balls stashed away. And whoever came in who was famous, he'd get them to sign it. Gosh, he met multiple presidents. But he never get a kick out of any. He wasn't giddy. He wasn't.
I remember one time at the restaurant, we were standing there, and he totally stirred it up with Gibson. And somebody asked Mr. Gibson for an autograph. And he said, "Yeah, no problem." He said, "Well, I heard you don't sign too many autographs. You could either be a old crabby guy or a racist or whatever." And I'm like, "What the hell?" He's got this bartender with dreadlocks. This black dude. He's cool as shit, man. I'm like, "Hey, man." The guy goes, Shannon goes, "Hey, you two, go down to the basement and get us a box of balls." So we go down in the basement. For some reason, it takes two of us. Me and this guy's got a little tuxedo, Shannon outfit on. He comes up and he's like, "Hey," to Gibson, he's like, "Sign these. You won't kill that reputation." He signs all like 12, the 12. He signed them all. Mr. Shannon put them back together and handed it to me. He goes, "Hey, go put them back." He just stole 12 Bob Gibson signed balls.
And that's what he do. He just put them in front of you and say, "Sign these."
Yeah,
he would
at
say,
$500 a pop, he just made
exactly.
$6,000. He's like, "Hey, put them back down." And Gibson's like, "Well, Big Shan, why am I?" And he's like, "Well, you don't want to run that reputation anymore."
I've seen him do it. He walk right up to Howard and stick stuff from there and sign that for him.
And the thing about him was he was fearless. There's a story about him and Dave Kingman. So Dave Kingman was a guy played around the league, big strong guy, Arizona State. He hit almost 500 home runs, but was one of the biggest jerks in baseball. And didn't get along with anybody. He was a guy who put a dead mouse in a female report in a shoebox and sent it to a female reporter. He was a bad person. So Mike would go up and get, Mike would ask you to do a pregame show with you, and "Hey Eddie, I need you for about 3 minutes." And so he goes up to Kingman, and Kingman starts chirping. "I don't know if I want." So at the end, Mike was like, "Hey, you." He said, "You don't want to do it, don't do it, but don't sit here and waste my time." And so now Kingman kind of turns around, and everybody around the cage stepped back because they were like, "Uh-oh," because when Mike would get that vein in his neck going and his eyebrow would get raised, it was battle stations, man.
Oh, man.
And Kingman thought about it because here's a guy that's a little older than him, and Mike back then was in really good shape. And Kingman looked at him and took a pass on him. But everybody was hoping that, this was going to happen because everybody wanted to see Dave Kingman get
Yeah. So with Mike, go back to his playing career, got cut short. Can you explain a little bit about that?
He had nephritis. It was a kidney ailment, and he took so many experimental drugs that they gave him 6 months to live. Now, here's a guy with 5 kids and 6 months to live. And as he'll tell you, he said, "I've already died once because nobody gave Mike a chance." But he's Mike Shannon.
And he was how old at that time?
30, maybe 30, with 5 kids, one on the way. And he survived, and he had a heart issue later in life. He kicked that in the butt. And everybody has some ailments, but he was tough hombre, man.
Yeah. So his playing career gets cut short. So
Right.
he goes right to the booth.
He goes into ticket sales. And this is why I tell young people: if you have an aspiration to work in any industry, get in the system.
That's right.
So
you don't have to be king to enjoy the palace.
Exactly.
Get in there. And
he got in the system. He sold tickets for a year. And at one point, they wanted to make him a coach. And at one point, they even thought about him being a manager. But he had these young kids, and, that would have been a lot because he loved being around his kids. He would take his kids to spring training every year, pile them up in the station wagon, and they drive down to Florida every year. But he decided he wanted to stay, and he kind of stumbled into the broadcasting thing because he was doing sports reports at KXOK, which is no longer with us. And Bob Hyland heard about him over there, and the brewery really liked Mike. And basically, as Mike would tell you, the brewery shoved me up Highlands, you know what, and he was stuck with me, and I was stuck with him. And the next thing you know, they threw him in with Jack. Jack worked with him a little bit in the off season, and the rest is history.
He told me one time, he never served anything but Anheuser-Busch at his bar. You couldn't get a Miller Lite or a Coors Light. And he said they took care of me when I was down and out, and my family needed, and the old man Bush, owned this place, owned the whole thing. And he was telling me, and then he opened the one in Edwardsville, and he stayed true to it. And at the airport, it's a little different because it's got a corporate thing. But he was so St. Louis. I mean, everything you want to talk about St. Louis, it's Mike. You talk about toaster. I mean, hell, he might have been at Toaster Avenue. I'm sitting in Edwardsville one day in the afternoon, and we're watching some sports. There's some horses running around on that big screen. His grandson was the boss, and he walks up and he says, "Hey, Grandpa, these new craft beers are out. It's been 10 years ago, whenever they were big." And he puts on, the pumpkin and the raspberry and all the other they got out there. And he goes, "These are high profit margin beers. What do you can do? Mom said ask you first." He goes, "What do you ask me?" He goes, "Well, they're not distributed by, they're not made by Anheuser-Busch." She want to know if, that's been a long time. You think it'd be okay if I sold these? There's more profit in it than there are at Budweiser. He goes, "So you're asking if I don't have a problem at all." He goes, "I think it's a great idea." He's like, "Really?" He's like, "She said you would never do it." And he goes, "Nah, you just got to do one thing." "What's that?" He said, "Take my name off the front of this joint." The kid said, "Just forget it." He goes, "Yeah, you get no problem." But I'm not involved in it.
He's so loyal to Anheuser-Busch. And I'm of the firm belief the billions of dollars that Anheuser-Busch spends on advertising and marketing and commercials and you name it, Mike Shannon has sold billions more. The Cold Frost he wanted to do in the broadcast, the Cardinal caravans that he would go on back in the day. And the caravans used to start in St. Louis. So they were hitting bars all over St. Louis. And Mike would come in with a wad of money, he'd start throwing it down, and he'd buy rounds of drinks, and it was always Budweiser, and then the other Anheuser-Busch products came online. The greatest ambassador Anheuser-Busch has ever had.
Absolutely.
Period. There's not even anybody close. As good as those commercials have been over the years, Mike Shannon has sold more beer than anybody that company's ever had.
There's no way one guy ever sold more beer for them than Mr. Shannon. He would every city he'd go in. Get anybody that wants a Budweiser. When you were in Milwaukee, when everybody's drinking, I'm thinking, we're going to get in a fight here. He didn't care. I've seen him tip over Coors Lights in Denver. He'll go and tip your beer over. "I'll buy you 2 Budweisers. Don't worry."
That's what he was.
And he had no cash on him, choke a horse. I'm standing thinking, I'm the younger guy. I'm going to get the hell beat out of me. And the guy, "I'm cool, man." He go, "Get him 10 Budweisers. Right? I mean, he actively worked for Budweiser his whole life.
Yeah.
Because that they took care of him when he had that family, and and then to fall into the broadcasting, just to, like you said, they saved him, didn't know what he was doing, and then to become that good at it. Right. Somebody saw that personality, and he should have walked around with a microphone in front of him. He was so funny. Somebody saw it, and he crafted it and became as good as he was.
When I think people liked him so much because he wasn't polished. He wasn't
He didn't go to Syracuse or anything like that.
It was his own style. It's who he was.
To listen to Mr. Shannon, he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And if you'd ever go up with him and watch it, he'd say, "Left fielders are playing, might as well play shortstop," and then the ball would go over the left fielder's head, and you'd and then he'd say something kind of silly, or Shannonisms. If you talk that much and have that much fun, you really enjoy it, and you're not afraid. Everybody else is like auditioning to keep their job all the time. Well, what are you going to do with him? He was there and it would be way more fun and you're talking about some really serious game. It's 1-0 in the 6th. Well, that reminds me of 1963 in Cape Girardeau, and they're like,
it come out of nowhere.
Yeah, we got a game we're listening to. You're going down 270, going, "We got to strike him." You just missed 4 pitches. I remember this guy Gary Smith. Boy, now that you guys mention that, and they're like, "Is he going to talk about it?" And you know what I mean. So, but that's how we are. That's how you are. That's how every other guy in St. Louis is. And his goofiness was kind of
it was genuine.
It was genuine and real, and that's what he was.
Whatever flashed through his brain,
right? And that's what he was saying, and he didn't care. He didn't have to worry about keeping his job tomorrow.
Right. The thing about him, and they used to call him the Moon Man. So the real story about this is they're out in the outfield stretching. Shannon, Gibson, maybe Brock. It's about 5 guys out stretching. And, back then they'd start the games at 8:15. So Mike's out there stretching. He's looking up the sky. He's looking around. He said, they're going to put a guy on that moon up there pretty soon. So everybody's looking. This is before Kennedy even said we're going to put somebody on the moon. And so everybody's kind of looking at him. He said, what are you talking about? Up there. There's going to be a guy walking around up there one day, sooner than you think. And so one of them said, okay, Moon Man. And that's how I got started. That's why they call him the Moon Man, because he predicted somebody was going to be on the moon before anybody else even thought about it. And that's who he was. If it flashed through his mind, he could just look at something, and it would remind him of something else, and then that story would get started. So he was deliberate and factual.
Yeah. The thing I always enjoyed about him as a broadcaster, if you didn't know he played, you didn't know. Yeah, Other than the fact that you could tell by the way he talked, the intelligent way he talked about it, you could tell, okay, that's somebody that understands it. But he never talked about himself, never brought his career up, never talked about this. You, as somebody that did play, I could listen to it and go, man, I don't know if this guy played or not, but it sure sounds like he's played. You know what I mean? That was just a way he went about it.
He would give you just enough to say that he's making some educated statements.
Right. You don't want to talking about his own personal small stories. It's about the knowledge had to be there from playing.
Yeah.
And he knew some stuff.
He only the only time he would ever talk about playing, it would be mostly self-deprecating. He always tells a story about opening day in Chicago one year. And he's 0 for 5 and he's 0 for 4 and Doug Harvey's the umpire. And so he called a strike on. He said, you got to be kidding, that's a strike? He said, yeah. And Mike said, who are you, God? He said, yeah, I'm God. He said, well, good, make it rain because I'm 0 for 4 today. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. But he also tells a story that he was 0 for 5 on opening day. The game got rained out, but the stats, they continue to keep the stats. He said, I was 0 for 5 and the season hadn't even started yet. But he would talk about things in that manner. Yeah. He also loved playing at Wrigley Field, because I remember my first time with him at Wrigley Field. He said, oh, you're going to love this place. I said, really? It's a dump. He said, no, you're going to love it. And I said, why do you love it? He said, because I hit over 300 here. It's the only place in baseball I ever hit over 300. And that's all you would know.
Yeah.
He wouldn't tell you anything else. Now, there are certain pitchers he could tell you about that he could hit, great pitchers. But other than that, he never bragged on or made somebody look bad, as far as, I own this guy or that guy.
Or trying to build himself up.
But the thing is, he played in one of the great – I think at one point he had either played with, against, or broadcast over 60 Hall of Famers. You think about that. That's a lot of good players he's seen. And knew most of them personally. I mean, he loved Tony Gwynn. Loved sitting around talking to Tony Gwynn.
He always talked about Tony Gwynn, the man. The only thing better he was at baseball was life. He was better at life than he was at baseball. Yeah. Tony Gwynn was and he never talked about too many people like that. I mean, he really
Willie Mays is another guy. He loved Willie Mays. That was one of his favorites.
And he said he was also the best player
he ever saw.
He said if you asked him that question, he'd say Willie Mays is the.
He'd tell you when he came out of the dugout, he never took his eyes off of him. From shagging balls to everything else.
He said, but he had a voice. And he goes, how did he talk like this? He goes, I think it was fake. He'd trick you.
The other thing about him was he loved going to the West Coast, because when they got to L.A., he knew everybody out there, because all the guys from L.A., they would come in from Vegas, and they would hang out. And that night, he and Chamberlain and Gibson and Red Fox, and who else was it? He was the only white guy that was running with him that night. And so they were at the end of the bar, and Mike kept looking up at Chamberlain, who he saw when he was in college, in high school. He kept looking up, and he said, I got to get out of here. I said, what's wrong, man? He said, I can't keep looking at this guy. I got a crook in my neck, man. And I forgot who was pitching the next day. It was somebody he really liked hitting against. And he looked up at him. He said, I got a crook in my neck. I got to go. But he loved being in L.A. with that crowd, but he never was a fan. He just liked hanging out with them. And the stories about when they would go to L.A. were legendary.
So the time, the Live at Shannon's.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about how that kind of came about, and those had to be some of the best times. I mean, just sitting there.
For me,
yeah.
I've done a lot in over 40 years in this business, and I think I'm most proud of that time. Now, we started this in the 80s. It was Mike Shannon, Bob Gibson, and me. I was just a traffic guy. I turned them loose, and they'd have stories. And we did it in the 80s, and then I left to go to another station in 91, and they just kind of went away. And so the reason I'm here now is when the Cardinals left KMOX, they went to another station, and they wanted to bring in their people, and it wasn't working. John Rooney had come in, and I've known John forever, and I thought it was going to be great. Mike and John, they'll do a great job. But the periphery people weren't very good. And so Mike called me one day. He said, "Hey, you ever thought about coming back and doing the show and being with the Cardinals?" I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Nobody asked me." He said, "Well, I'm asking." I said, "Well, I'm interested." Told my agent, "Hey, you're going to get a phone call. Don't lose the deal." So he called me back, and the rest is. And doing that show the second time was so much fun. And I know people who've listened to it, the storytelling is what it was all about. But I think the thing that was most infectious is Mike laughing. Mike had a laugh that, you could hear it a mile away and you knew exactly who it was. And the people he could get to come on. Mm-hmm. And I think the best example, Hall of Famer Randy Johnson, who didn't have the greatest relationship with the media. But Randy Johnson knew Mike, knew Bob Gibson. And so he wanted to meet Bob Gibson. So Mike set it up. So Johnson comes to him and says, "Hey, I really appreciate you doing it." He said, "Anything I can do for you?" He said, "Well, I got a radio show in St. Louis. Love for you to come in." This is Johnson's last year in the show. He said, "Would you mind coming on?" He said, "Yeah, sure. It's you and me." He said, "Yeah, you and me and another guy. We just have fun." So we do the show, and Johnson was so open, so fun-loving, that when the show ended, he was like, "We're done?" "Yeah, man, we've been talking for an hour." And he sat there for another hour and a half, the three of us, and I could not believe that Mike Shannon can get this out of this person who I'd heard all these negative things about, but we could get that out of anybody. I mean, nobody said no to that show.
Yeah, that was a great environment too, because you had some folks sitting around after dinner. They were relaxed, and it was just a good atmosphere and everybody could kind of. I've sat there 50 times just sitting next table having a drink, listening to you just because the game was over. It was so not serious.
And we never talked about the game. No, that's the thing. We talked about everything but the game.
And you had, you always had a player from the other team or the umpire it was just cool to hear we're all having a drink, and it's interesting to hear those guys and everything they know.
I think whenever you have a teammate on, a former teammate, one of the favorite shows for me was Bill White and Bob Gibson together, and they were roommates at one point. And so Bill White tells a story that they're roommates, and Bob says, they're going to get rid of one of us at some point. He said, "The only thing I'm going to tell you, if you go to another team, if I throw you a pitch low and away, don't try and pull it." So, Bill White kind of naive, man, they're not going to get rid of it. So they trade him the next year. So lo and behold, White goes out, tries to pull a pitch, and Gibson hits him right in the elbow. I mean, he nails him right in the elbow, and he's going down the first baseline, MF and Bob. And Bob said, "I told you not to go out there." And they go to dinner that night. So Bob is listening to Bill White tell this story, and he just says to Mike, he said, "Hey, Mike, who thought it was a good idea to invite this guy?" I mean, they were having so much fun, and Mike really had incredible respect for those guys. I mean, those are his favorite people. And to this, before he passed, he would call Bill White. Bill White's one of the last of the Mohegans of that '64 team, because he saw Javier the previous year, where there weren't many guys around, but they would stay in touch, and that's the kind of guy he was. He was very close to his teammates as they got older.
Yeah. So as we wrap this up, what are you guys going to miss the most?
Ooh, that's good,
man. He meant so much to us.
Yeah.
The game, that was secondary.
Yeah, it really became. I mean, remember the first time I seen him, nervous as hell, try to do a commercial, and then that's been gone for 25 years. It's almost like an uncle, a father. I can't. It's hard for me to look at it and be sad and think I'm gonna miss. I feel so blessed that I got it to where I don't feel like it's right or fair of me to be sad yet. What I'm gonna miss is, just him, just having dinner and asking the guy next to you. He says table for 5, and what do you do? And the guy says, I built the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I sell beer and burgers in Alton, Illinois. What do you mean? And the next night we go out and the guy, I wrote Mork and Mindy.
Close friends.
He had the people. And then, hey, I got a buddy of mine coming. He didn't say it was Bobby Knight. Yeah. You're like, just the fun and not that Bobby Knight's any cooler than the guy that made the Panama Canal. Just the idea that Mr. Shannon, the time spent with him was so enjoyable, so fun, and I was constantly learning. So I'm gonna miss and I'm not going to say I'm going to miss. I'm just going to treasure and cherish and be one. I feel like, there were very few. Mike will tell you, the same group was together all the time because there wasn't no newbies. It was tight. And then he had the guy that would come along, and introduce you to. But as far as I just feel as I'm just very at this point I'm real happy, really proud, and I'm just good with it, because it was cool.
Yeah, I'm like Eddie. I grieved for a bit, and with each day I was like, damn, you lucky, man. You're blessed. And just like Eddie was talking about, I remember one day we were in Washington. He said, hey, what do you there's 2 stories I have to tell you before we leave. We're in Washington. Hey, what do you got going today? I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, come on, we're going to go for a ride. So we go to the Pentagon, and the next thing I know, we're sitting in this room called the Tank. It's where the president makes all these huge decisions, and there's a placard, the president, vice president, chief of naval staff. We're in this room, okay? And you couldn't take a picture of it. You couldn't do anything. And so Mike walks by the president's placard and looks at it. He says, he was about to say something. He kind of just shook his head. And I'm looking at him, and he had this look on his face that just says, damn, just like that. And I'm saying double damn, because I am in the room where the president of the United States is making these critical military decisions, all because of Mike Shannon. So my final story. So you're familiar with the honey badger.
Yep.
One of the 5 most feared animals on the planet. And so there was this documentary on, and I was so fascinated by it. I called the zookeeper. I had a radio show at the time, and I got him on, and he's telling me about, there's only 1 or 2 honey badgers in the U.S. I'm like, well, damn. And so he says, hey, if you're ever in San Diego, I'll be more than happy to give you a tour. I'm like, great. So we get in the playoffs that year. So Mike has this golf setup for us. We're playing some very nice country club. He says, all right, big boy, we're going to go out and play today. I said, well, I can't go today. He said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to the zoo. He said, where you going to the zoo? We got a zoo back in St. Louis. We got a really good zoo. I said, yeah, but they got a honey badger. He said, a honey badger? And so I showed him a video of this honey badger. He picked up the phone and called the golf course. Hey, we're not going to be able to make it today. We're going to the zoo. Just like that, and hung up. He was so fascinated by this honey badger. He said, well, if you want to see it, I guess I need to go see it too. And that's who he was, where he was always accommodating and always wanting to learn. Here's the other thing about Mike. He's such a stickler on penmanship and punctuation. He would read copy. No, that's not right. And he would go through it like a teacher.
Yep.
And
he'd correct everything.
Exactly.
He'd correct everything.
He was a stickler for detail. And some people said, well, he always looked like he was a Met. No, Mike Shannon knew where everything was supposed to be.
He'd take a letter out. He'd take
exactly.
Never seen
anything. I said, where were you at when I was in the 3rd grade? I wouldn't have to go there twice. He was that guy.
I'm going to end with something. I won't talk anymore. That's the second to last time I saw him, not just right before he passed, but a week or 2 before that, I had gone down and I had to go to this physical therapy place that he was at. he's got his room. He's by himself in there, man. I'm like, what the hell? And he's in a chair, you know. And I go, we sat and talked. The game was on. You know, they're all horse shit. 1966, and I ain't seen a good one. We're laughing, you know. He's like, I got to get out of here. And he's like, his wife Lori was coming, you know, so it was fine. And I got to the door, and he's like, man, I'd like to get out of here. And I turned around and I said, I'll tell you what. You want to go, you get the car right now. I think I told you that.
Yeah, you going to break him out.
I told you. I said, you get in my car. You coming back. You stay at my house with me. I got an extra room. And he goes.
Because we were going to take him down to Florida.
We were going to take him to Florida. Yeah. Right. That was right before that. Right. And we were trying to break him out, take him to Florida. And I turned around and I said, and I mean, I was serious. That's when, well, let's go, man. The heck with it. You know what I mean? And he goes, let me tell you something, big boy. I'm fine right here. And I go, all right, thought you wanted to leave. He goes, nah, I'm going to tell you, my life was a straight flush. And I go, you're a straight flush? I go, all right. He goes, I'm good. I'm good with everything. It was a straight flush. And I'm opening the door to leave. He goes, and you know the trick to a straight flush, don't you? I turn around and he goes, if the other guys all got good hands, it only works if the other guys all got good hands. And I said, did you just make that up? And he goes, I think I did. And I said, damn, that's pretty good. He goes, because a straight flush ain't worth nothing if everybody else got to have a good hand, too. I turned that door. I said, nah, he had to have heard that somewhere. Drove home for 2.5 hours thinking, man, that was pretty good. I think I looked it up like it had been said before. It was cool. My life was a straight flush.
He said one time, Brendan Ryan, former Cardinal, who was different.
Yeah.
Different is an understatement. Yeah. Mike saw him on the field, and he said, you know, that's the guy that would bring a Christmas tree to somebody's house on the 4th of July. And you knew exactly what he was saying. You knew exactly what he meant.
You know.
I mean, he said, there's a guy that bring a Christmas tree to your house for a 4th of July barbecue.
That says it all.
There you go.
Well, I have a piece of Mike Shannon memorabilia. You were talking about he was a collector. So my first save in the big leagues, afterwards, I think John Rooney brought it down to me, but they both signed their scorecard.
Yeah, he's big on
and
that.
Mike put
to the guy in the county.
I don't think that's on there, but it said congratulations on the first one. Only 299 left, and I have that framed and in my office, and it meant a lot to me. And I think it was his scorecard. I don't think it was Rooney's. I think it was his. You might know better.
Was it in pencil?
I think so.
Yeah,
I have to go back and look.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was his, and he signed it. And but he was thoughtful, you know.
Yeah,
and,
he was.
And I think that was and I think he probably knew how important that was to me as a St. Louis kid
from the county.
For the kid from the
county. He would say that all the time. The right hand, you know, the one from the county.
And you know that Mr. stuff. That was just because he couldn't remember the first name.
Exactly. Yeah. Mr. Mays.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I appreciate you sharing the stories, giving a little insight. You know, to maybe what fans didn't know and see that other side to them.
I hope as a normal Joe that I could convey to them that, you know, I'm no Hall of Famer, no baseball player, no nothing. I snuck in by the grace of God, if you're just a regular guy, if I could just somehow or another pass it on to how cool the guy was, he really, really was, and to say that he was underestimated and not even, I mean, he was even bigger than, it was cool. It was fun to watch. It really was.
He was larger than life. That's
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
When he walked in the room, you knew it.
You
can smell him, too. You can smell him.
You can smell his cologne.
You could walk, you say, Shannon was here recently.
Exactly. Exactly. You can smell his cologne. And his members-only jackets. And, you know, one other thing, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say it, and I think I can speak for you, Eddie. You can jump in. He taught me how to be a father. He taught me, and, you know, being a father is a challenge. But I never didn't hear him say, I love you, with every opening statement to his kids in a conversation, and he always ended that way. And he listened to everything they said in between. And while you try and take a little bit from here and there from people who do it the right way, but that was a huge impact on me. And his kids all turned out good.
That's right.
I mean, you know, he had 6 of them, and they were all different. But you know what? He found time for all of them. Now, some of them would tell you he was their favorite, And then I would say, well, I think you might be tied for first. Let's just put it that way.
Don't be afraid to be you.
There you go.
Be yourself,
and they're all
and
different.
you'll be all right. He would teach anybody. You be you. You got to be you, and walk tall. Do your thing. Stuff you've heard, and just be yourself and ride with it, man. Bet on you, and you. Not everybody's going to be an all-American, world-class athlete, but I mean, he taught me a lot about confidence in business and about things about. Why not you? You know what I mean? And to be a good dad, and to and how much fun it is to respect. And the coolest guy in the room should also be the nicest guy in the room. You know? And he's not afraid to say, "God bless, I love you." When you walk out, big old tough guy, and then, "God bless you guys, I love you." You're like, you would think you wouldn't want to say that because you'd be, shit, you didn't care. That's what it taught me. That put your guard down and be good to people.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep, great stuff. Well, it's definitely a life lived for sure with Mike Shannon. He was America's guest everywhere he went.
What'd you say? Some 37-year-old guy died 50 years too young because he lived.
Mike took over. Yeah, Mike is 83 on the birth certificate, but some guy died at 37. Mike took about 12 years of his life and continued.
His whole life.
Exactly.
He got 2 lives.
Well, we appreciate it. Thanks for sharing the stories, and thank you for tuning into the Chattersbox podcast. You can listen to all of the podcasts that we've done this year and going back to last year on any of the podcast platforms, and also you can watch it on the Cardinals YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next month.
This organization belongs to the fans. We just enjoy it.
Shannon cuts viciously at Bell's first pitch, and there it goes. It's a home run. Checks. Brummer's stealing home. He is saved, and the Cardinals win. Brummer stole home. Forces pitched a no-hitter. It's the first time in the history of Cardinal baseball that a pitcher has 2 no-hitters.
Swing and a long one. There it is, folks. Baseball history. A second Grand Slam home run for Fernando Tatis. Swing and a home run. If it's fair, it is fair. And the Cardinals win it. Swing and a miss. The Cardinals are world champions for 2006. Get up, baby. Get up, get up, get up. At the wall. It's a 2-run homer. Cardinals win it 4-3. Listen to this crowd. We're here for a short period of time and enjoy it and try to enhance it in any way we can. And hopefully I've done that over the years. God bless you. Thanks.